this is the two of us, but that's probably what matters less. Robert is here representing a creative agency, myself, Common Goal, the purpose-driven movement within football. But actually what we're not wanting to make here is a pitch, because we created what we call temporary to be something temporary. We're actually here to disappear. So we created this collaboration because we are aware that we have a 2030 agenda as humanity. We do have a good knowledge about what kind of goals we need to score in order to get this planet and us as people into a sustainable environment. But at the same time, we somehow don't manage to work together. We continue with the patterns of not being able to see ourselves as part of something bigger than ourselves. So that's the reason why the two of us came together. Now, collaboration is getting into change in football. Collaboration is what we believe is actually the necessary ingredient for us to tackle the challenges of our times at the scale we need it. So we have seen like goals like the SDGs before fail. We have had Paris Agreement, we have had MDGs, now we have SDGs, and we're just 6 years away, and we still have the feeling that we don't get there. Now, how do we incentivize? How do we actually get people into this mindset of radically collaborating? And that doesn't happen by itself, because during our whole life we have been educated not to collaborate. We have been educated to be our best selves in order to compete with somebody else and be number one in whatever we do. Now, it needs an enabling force in order to achieve that. It needs an enabling force in order to get there, and people think about working collectively towards what is a collective goal set, in this case the SDGs. Now, this is why we come to football. And football, not just because it's the biggest universal language, it's that language that's actually spoken by most of us, but it speaks to us also on a level that touches our passion, that touches our emotion, and that gets into like every sphere of our lives, but it's not being used currently. Football currently isn't seen, or is not seeing itself as being that force that can actually unite people behind this collective ambition, which is meeting the goals we need to meet in order to make this planet and our people survive. And not just like in terms of looking at people and planet as our goals, but actually also looking at the industry itself. If you look at football, there is a big question on actually relevance and resilience over time, which needs to be taken into account, and actually being an incentive in order to take yourself as an industry there. Here you have just some numbers on what's actually your consumers' wish, what's actually your employees' wish, and what's actually your investors' wish. And at the end of the day, in all of those, we come to the topic of impact, like the purpose of why you're doing what you're doing. Why is football actually a commercial, or is bound to be a commercial success over time? Here you have just some numbers to back that up, but I probably would leave it here. Now, we will get into some of our case studies, which should represent or give you some examples of how that could work. And wherever you are actually positioned in the industry, the invitation is to maybe get inspired by what you see from wherever you see it, being you an athlete, being a business, being a club, being an institution, being a brand. The focus here will be brand, but it actually applies to everybody.
Thank you, Jürgen. From the umbrella dimension of football as a whole, as a platform, as a marketplace, to the dimension of sponsorship as a driving force in the industry, a commercially driving force in the industry, and how the world of football, the world we know, is also impacting sponsorship and vice versa. So if we look at the world for brands, how that has evolved, obviously most of the brands, 90% of the brands, will share a brief with a agency or with a sports property saying we want to reach out and engage with the Gen Z. But that generation is also changing not just their behavior, but their attitudes, their sentiments, their expectations, and brands need to match, and brands need to engage, especially on these changed behaviors and sentiments. And that means that as well as football has to change and drive value, social value beyond entertainment value, beyond commercial value, interconnected with the value of the game as an industry, also brands, the category of sponsorship needs to drive and be part of that change. But not just be part of that change, but also change the value proposition of sponsorship. Driving sponsorship to something and the industry to something that's not media first, that's not digital first, that's not fans first. It may sound weird, but it's impact first. Because we are so superficially engaging, the majority of the brands in football, in soccer, in sports are engaging with fans as consumers, but not with relevant stakeholders of the game, of an industry that's more than just a sport. Because if we understand that soccer is more than a business, it can be the best business in the world. And that's why today we would love to share with you some case studies on impact sponsorship across the last 2 World Cups. And to give you 3 takeaways and 3 recipes that we believe are very strong, a very simple methodology to bring sponsorship to the next level, or to the level where sponsorship should be as a category for brands, but also for rights holders, is that we look at some of the news, and I apologize to every Chelsea fan or associated clubs who are also looking for shirt sponsors, but the narrative needs to change right here. Whenever you engage with a brand, properties engage with sponsors on a contractual level at the beginning, KPIs need to be installed, social impact KPIs need to be installed. The narrative needs to be that a sponsorship is driving more value to fans, to society, back to the club and to the brand, bringing the money, than just a transactional force for marketing purposes. And that's when you see that in a world economic crisis as we have it now, the properties also need to rethink their value proposition. And we're looking at here, and I can say that not very proudly, I'm from Germany and we're hosting the Euro next year. We are an automotive country. The Euro next year does not have an automotive partner for the automotive category. UEFA has not managed to sell that, and that's also why, because the properties we have, and that's called to be the most sustainable Euros of all time, have not managed to put the value proposition up front, because sponsorship is more than a media tool and an engagement tool with customers. And speaking of such, we need to understand, brands need to understand that the way of storytelling needs to be scripted differently. We need to think, especially when we look on the road to 26, a platform that enables brands to speak to the world in a unity as no other sport, maybe only the Olympics could do to a certain extent. That we need to have meaningful narratives and long-term platforms. And the best case study so far up to date here still is P&G with their 8-year-long run across the Olympics and the platform Thank You Moms. And that's something that's inherited so much meaning and cause and purpose that will give brands the power to do more and be more through the way of storytelling. And that brings us to the aspect, and that's what we will show you in a minute with 3 really fun case studies, that it's not just about promotion of products, promotion of brands, of values. It's really proof points. Brands need to show credible action. Brands need to put action first. Actions need to be inherited in the narrative for any social cause you would pursue and follow. Is it equality? Is it diversity? Is it sustainability? And we'll show you the full range now. And Jürgen will kick off with our friends from the Three Stripes Adidas.
But maybe before we get into that, maybe just a few words on how we translate like the term of radical team play or radical collaboration into action. Like over the past 20 years, what we have done actually is to surface everything that's happening in communities where football is being used as a tool for social change. So we have here actually also in the crowd representatives like Street Soccer USA or others who across the world are using football in order to accelerate their transformational efforts in their communities. So that has grown into a network of over 200 organizations in over 100 countries, working with round about 2 million youth at risk every day. So that's just one way where the NGO world has committed to radical collaboration. Now, how do we translate that into the industry? And the tool we're using there is a 1% reference. And the term is like, what would happen if 1% of every dollar that is generated thanks to commercializing the game would be invested in impact. And that's the examples we talk about here on brands, but it applies. And we actually started out with athletes and their salaries. We started out with clubs and their stadium revenues, but also with brands and their products. So the first one we look at is, if this works, if this works, if this works, Adidas. Adidas committed to 1% of their revenues based on the global football sales. And it's an interesting one because impact starts to participate within the commercial logic of the sales of a product. So the more balls are sold, the more is being contributed to impact, just thanks to the 1% logic, because 1% of more is more at the end for impact. And that's being then, this thing doesn't work, and that is then being translated into like key action areas. In this case, it was mainly meant to support gender equity initiatives, mental health initiatives, and racial justice initiatives, which are 3 out of the 5 areas we have identified and built coalitions around in order to maximize the impact based on best practice we have identified, as I said, over the past 20 years. So that is then being activated at the World, that's the World Cup in Qatar, where Adidas, like looking at the topic of gender equity, was just raising awareness on that. We were only looking at half of the game when we were looking at the men's World Cup, and the women's World Cup was about to come this year in the summer. And then also like here, Play Proud inspired, like LGBTQ rights inspired, the match that happened at the Rose Bowl between Juventus and Real Madrid, and the artwork out of the community work we're doing towards supporting social inclusion, especially looking at the LGBTQ community.
Cool. So now to a less original fun brand, not an endemic brand such as Adidas, who is a native part of the game, a car company called Hyundai from South Korea, long-term FIFA partner since 1999. And the brief was not very easy. It was very complex. We had 3 elements. We had a car, which is not so sustainable at first, if you look beyond the electricity piece. We have the topic of sustainability, so it should be a sustainability first campaign from Hyundai for the World Cup. And then we had the context, the environment of Qatar, with all the sentiments towards the tournament, with a tournament in the desert and a lot of stadiums created, and a questionable aspect and imprint of actual sustainability from an ecological standpoint. How did we bring this together? We started on 2 layers. One is the social impact and one is the storytelling. And the storytelling should have been a very simple but also soul-driven piece. So we brought together the aspect of the greatest goal. You can see here Maradona, the goal of the century, of the last century, that he scored, and the goal of Hyundai being carbon neutral by 2045. So the corporate vision and mission connected with the simplicity of football in one easy platform. And that's the goal of the century. A platform that's supposed to live on at least until 2030, as Hyundai has prolonged their partnership with FIFA until 2030. So they will be on the road to 26, working on the narrative of goal of the century, a united world for sustainability, bringing their product, their technology to enhance the sustainability of the World Cup, but also driving engagement through all of their communication with the consumers, leveraging the media platform that they have bought into to spread the message. And what we did here, as Jürgen referenced the 1% logic, Hyundai has pledged 1% of their FIFA World Cup sponsorship fee to Common Goal. And how that evolved into a campaign, a very realistic campaign, we'll show you in a very short and quick video, and I hope the sound works, but I hand over to you.
The World Cup. Everyone's watching. Big brands, bigger business, the biggest sponsorship deals.
It's crazy, it's beautiful.
all there for the same thing. Sell more, shift more, make more. While all the big brands use the World Cup to draw attention to their products to make more, we redirected the world's attention to this. Less CO2, less emissions, less waste, less plastic. We kicked it off, built a team. That's BTS, and yes, they rewrote that song. Then Steven Gerrard made his pledge for the planet.
Liverpool legend Steven Gerrard just pledging to plant 500 trees for each one of England's goals.
Then we asked the world to make their pledge. And the world showed up. Avijit from Mumbai and the boys used one TV for the whole month, even to watch their favourite soaps. Michelle from Southampton unplugged her washing machine for 6 weeks. Christina from Korea, Yasmin from Oman, and Wessamel from Agadir went vegan, even though he's a butcher. Plus a few friends too, even Cristiano.
This is my pre-match vegan meal, contributing to a better world. See!
When we wanted less, we got more. Most talked about brand. Most loved brand. And one final pledge to the world. When everybody put their logo first, we put Earth first.
So thanks for making the sound work. There's a lot of magic to it, or there's a lot of ways how you can explain or rate the case after the case was delivered. So across all the media space, Hyundai invested significantly with all of their markets into a global program, a very diverse, across the entire sales funnel until the POS, but also across all digital spaces you could imagine, across all facets. So that's just a very comprehensive creative setup, but even more importantly, were two elements, the humanization and the fun. So sustainability is a very, very tough subject. It's sensitive, but it's also very complex. It's very educational. We wanted to engage with the fans in a very playful way, which is why the giants of BTS committed a song to it, which I don't even know the digits we scored on YouTube with it organically. We had collaborations with artists, with celebrities, with ambassadors outside of football, because we leveraged the World Cup, the power of the World Cup, and that's also something for 2026, through entertainment, through fashion, through art, through architecture. We had Alex Morgan there, we had Nadia Nadim there, who is a big ambassador for human rights. We had Jeremy Scott, a designer who helped us create a dedicated shirt. So we tried to leverage this message way beyond the tournament, and not just outside in, but inside out. And that's how we then continued this year in 2023 for the Women's World Cup. The goal of the Century campaign was expandable and scalable, and that's when we linked to the aspect of narrating and creating platforms that are flexible in itself for storytelling. We brought the story of the originators, the pioneers of women's football, to the stage under the banner of Goal of the Century in New Zealand, Australia. And talking as such about New Zealand, Australia, I hand over to you, Jürgen, for our final case.
Maybe before we get into this, I think it's getting clear that we're not talking business or impact, and we're not talking business and impact, but we're actually talking business because of impact. So, but therefore, obviously, the impact needs to be a proof point. It needs to be real, and it can't just be talking. So, oops. With Fox Sports, we worked during the Men's World Cup and the Women's World Cup, and the contribution was actually 1% of the airtime for a start, which was very interesting to see how that then was being used across the channel and in different formats, and the response Fox Sports became on the back of it as very valued content by their viewers. As I said, at the Women's World Cup, and that was then different moments. We had a festival at the World Cup where actually young female leaders from all across the world came together. and it were presented on Fox Sports with their individual inspiring stories. It was backed by the US women's national team. That was just a situation here at the Sydney studio of Fox Sports. And the national women's soccer team in the US backed it up with a mental health campaign. So there the content was supported by Fox Sport at the same time. So that's what we would want you to stay with, actually. We can do so much by ourselves. If we don't really team up, it won't lead us very far. We might feel very comfortable with what we, in our realm, achieve, but if we don't connect the dots, if we don't think about how our contribution can be part of a real solution at scale, it will be always very limited. So thanks very much for all of you for making your best possible contribution to what we all together need to achieve. Thanks very much.
Thank you.